All right, friends, welcome back to History with Tim, and happy Halloween. I hope you all are having a great day. I hope your little kids are getting a lot of candy. You know, Halloween is a Irish-based holiday. Fun fact, one of the few holidays that we celebrate that are... Ooh, I have an issue with my eye. A few holidays we celebrate that find their roots from Ireland. But, you know, for today, I'm going to take us to another place in the British Isles, and that's going to be London in the 1880s. Now, yesterday we did Selena Spooky Boo's video on the Salem witch trials, which that ended up being almost a 45-minute video. Today we're going to be covering someone connected to Selena Spooky Boo, and that is KallmeKris, Chris Collins. Much like Selena, she's much more... Chris is much more of a vlogger, so to speak. And she's very funny. She used to be an actress. I guess she still is an actress. She just did a movie with Selena, actually. So I'll throw a shout out for their movie. I need to remember what it's called. But with that said, she enjoys doing these videos as well. And she does much more conspiracy, cults, and horror kind of videos. And today we're going to be discussing her video on none other than Jack the Ripper. Now, her video is called Jack the Ripper Unmasked, and it's going to be down below in the links with the description and everything, as always. But before we get into that, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Tim. This is my channel. Here we make original content. We watch historical related videos, much like this. We play historical-oriented video games, as well as react to videos and other such things. So, with that said, thanks so much for joining us, and let's get into Jack the Ripper. Now, Jack the Ripper is kind of an anomaly because we still to this day really don't know who he was. You know, there's several theories on who it could be. You know, some people think it's a man named Montague John Druitt. Another thinks Aaron Kaminsky and Dr. Thomas Neil Cream and Prince Albert Victor. These are all people that have been suspects, but they haven't been definitively proven. The only thing we know is true are the victims, the 5 main Ripper victims. That's Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. Now, these are the 5 that we confirm as Jack the Ripper. Now, we actually don't know what Jack the Ripper really went by, because Jack the Ripper was he didn't actually come up with that name. Now, he did correspond, or it's believed he corresponded with the London Metropolitan Police, but there's no real evidence that was him either. The only thing that has any evidence to that is something known as the From Hell letter, and he doesn't even call himself Jack the Ripper in that letter. He just signs it From Hell, and the letter contained a box, and in that box was what is believed to be part of one of the victims. I believe it was her kidney. Now, Jack the Ripper, it was an anomaly in the fact that he wasn't caught, but also it was terrifying that he got away the way he did. That's what was able to make so many of these conspiracy theories of people believing that he had association with the British government. You know, I mentioned Prince Albert Victor. That was Queen Victoria's eldest grandson, the son of Edward VII. A lot of people thought it was him or someone connected to him, because he would go on to die at a young age, and I believe it's been confirmed he died of syphilis. I'm not sure, though, but that might be from Hell. From Hell is a movie from Tim Burton starring Johnny Depp as the inspector who did the investigation. It's highly fictional, but pretty much Scotland Yard assigned to the Whitechapel murders, as they were known at the time, a man named Frederick Aberline. Aberline was nothing like the Johnny Depp version. Aberline was actually a career police officer. He was a middle-aged man. He pretty much, this case destroyed him because he could not figure it out for the life of him. And he wasn't the only inspector involved. Other officers were involved, and they just never were able to figure it out. Now, the reason I'm picking Jack the Ripper, because I have a funny story, because my sister lives in London. And when she first moved there, she was there on a college program. And we went and we did the Jack the Ripper tour with at the time, my brother-in-law was her boyfriend, and we went and did it. And it was the first time he ever did it, which is hysterical, being he grew up in London. But I remember we were going around Whitechapel, and in England, they'll brick off alleyways, I guess, to make it more, it belongs to the business then. But one of the alleyways was bricked up, but it was, a mural was put on it that looked like Jack the Ripper, and this tour creeped me out so bad that we're walking, and I turn and I look down this alleyway, and I just see the silhouette of what I thought was Jack the Ripper. But Jack the Ripper is a very fascinating story in criminology in general and history. You know, this was England's Zodiac killer. You know, the Zodiac killer never got caught technically. So let's get into KallmeKris's Jack the Ripper Unmasked. As I said, Chris Collins, KallmeKris, give her a subscribe. She does actually like one of these every week. I actually, on my way home from work, sometimes I just listen to her because she's much like Selena Spooky Boo in the fact that she adds comedy to it and it makes it very humorous. But I've been rattling on for 6 minutes, so let's get into it.
Cults. Serial cults. Cults. What was that? Crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder. All things that I love to consume, and I know you do too, you sick-minded, beautiful, intellectual-headed freak. And today, we are doing just that, yes. Jay makes smoke come out of my mouth. We are going to be talking about one of the most infamous, uncaught serial killers of all time. I know I'm dipping into Captain Jack Sparrow when I look like Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes. I need to get in it. Also, my hat works both ways, which is crazy, so people can't...
Fun fact, Sherlock Holmes actually never wore that hat. I always think that's a very funny thing that all the Sherlock Holmes wear that hat, but the actual character Sherlock Holmes never actually wore that hat.
Talk behind my back without me knowing, you know? Life hack. Where was I? We're talking about Jack the Ripper and unraveling the mystery. So let's hop into our carriages, slap our horse on the ass, go Mach 0.05 down the alleyway, yell, whoa, whoa, horse.
I just gotta say, that's a nice pipe. As someone that smokes tobacco pipes, and I'm not saying it's good to smoke, it's not, but I do it because I used to reenact, and that's kind of a good way to stay warm. That's a nice pipe, I must say.
Horsey, and deep dive through the carriage, over the horse, into this serial killer together.
This Christmas, be legendary.
As a commoner in Victorian London, you wake up every morning in a cramped and dirty room that you share with several other people. You can barely breathe in the stale and smoky air, and you cough from the dust and soot that cover everything.
So what she's showing right now is clips from that movie From Hell. Again, so the From Hell letter, it's let me actually, give me a second. I want to read it to you. Let me see. From Hell letter. Okay, so here's the letter. So it was written to the Mr. George Lusk, the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. In the letter, it says, Mr. Lusk, sir, I need you half the kidney. I send you half the kidney I took from the woman, preserved it for you. Other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out. You only wait a while longer. Signed, Catch Me You Can, Mr. Lusk. And it was addressed From Hell. So that's a really interesting thing. And the thing was, the thing that confused people is the murders were so good. Like, that's a weird thing to say. They were done with such precision and done with such skill. But, you know, the way the letter is written, so like for sir, it actually says sore, so S-O-R. Kidney is spelled K-I-D-N-E. You know, and there's some people that try to make a theory that this has something to do with the Freemasons. That's actually the theory that From Hell is premised on. But the thing is, it doesn't make sense. So that's why a lot of people believe he actually was a butcher and not a doctor, because a butcher would know how to cut up a body, but a butcher also would not be as educated. A doctor would be educated. And that's the From Hell letter is one of the most chilling things ever, because it came with a kidney. So it's terrifying to think about.
Dress in your ragged and worn clothes and head out to the noisy, chaotic streets. You dodge the carts and carriages that rattled on the cobblestones and the horses that leave their droppings behind. You smell the stench of rotting garbage, sewage, and animal carcasses that pile up in the sidewalks and gutters. You hear the cries of beggars, hawkers, and children, and the occasional church bells that tolls in the distance. You walk for miles to reach your workplace, where you will spend the next 12 hours or more toiling in harsh and dangerous conditions for a pittance. You have no hope in escaping this miserable and hopeless life. And after a grueling day at work, you have little energy or more left to enjoy yourself. But sometimes you crave the relief of the misery and monotony of your life. You might head to the pub, where you could drink a pint of ale, play a game of cards, or listen to a song or a story. You might also go to the music hall, where you could watch a variety of acts, from singers to dancers to comedians and magicians. You might even splurge on a ticket to a cheap theatre, where you can see the melodrama, a pantomime, or a burlesque show. The city's brothels may offer you relief, with being a line of work that employed anywhere from 8,000 to 80,000 women. And if you thought life during the day was miserable, when the sun had set, an entirely new host of miseries would make themselves known. As night falls, the city changes. A thick fog descends, enveloping the streets in an eerie and gloomy atmosphere. You could barely see a few feet ahead.
All right, so I'm going to stop right there for 1 second, because I like that it's showing the silhouette. Now, like I said, this is generally the silhouette we give to Jack the Ripper, just because in general, we don't know what he looked like. You know, originally, a lot of the silhouette, a lot of the political cartoons of the era that we're talking about, the Ripper killings, had him as a barber, like Victorian barber, not like what we know barbers as today. Barbers of the Victorian era were known to be also surgeons. But a barber, a butcher, it's a very modern-esque idea, because even like Assassin's Creed, that game where Jack the Ripper is one of the main antagonists, you know, he's wearing the top hat with the caped cloak and everything. But, you know, Chris is describing life, and it's so funny because, you know, she's from Canada as well. So I'm not saying, you know, she has a different experience, but London is very similar at this era to places like Manhattan, like New York City. And where these murders took place, Whitechapel. Whitechapel it's not terrible now, but at this era, it's very similar to the Five Points area in New York. 5 Points is, if you've ever seen the film Gangs of New York or know anything about New York history, 5 Points is where the immigrants lived, where the gangs were, where the most violence were, where people would just be found dead in the streets. You know, that's what Whitechapel is. Whitechapel is that kind of area. So that's why at first glance, this wasn't seen as a serial killer. This was seen as just, oh, it's random killing in Whitechapel. What's new? But then it was I'm sorry, I have such an itchy nose. What made it so different and so strange was the intricacy, how they were cut. And when you realize this happened in the dark, he wasn't sitting there with like a flashlight doing what he was doing. He was literally doing everything in the pitch black off muscle memory, which is what makes it that much more terrifying.
Ahead of you. Dark and occluded, the shadowed corners of London alleyways provided ample hiding opportunity for cities in many, many dangers. And with many people poor and desperate at this time, it was hard to survive at the bottom of the socio-economic ladder, leading many to turn to crime just to get by. Nowhere was this more prevalent than London's East End, an overcrowded and incredibly poor area where crime and poverty were all too common. And many people resorted to stealing from shops, markets, houses, or even from other people in the streets. Pickpockets, shoplifters, burglars, and highwaymen were all types of thieves who preyed on the unsuspecting or the wealthy. Some thieves worked alone, while others were part of organized gangs or networks. And theft was often driven by poverty, addiction, and hunger. And violence was frequent as well, when encounters spawned from desperation would turn bloody, as a commoner with close to nothing tries to cheat and steal from their neighbor, who has just as little, if not less. And while some violence stemmed from necessity, there were also those criminals hiding in the dense, thick fog with much more sinister motivations. And right as it seemed that life was at its worst, would begin to turn up dead, with organs missing, only to be found in dark, filthy alleyways, where the smell of their bodies would mix with rotting garbage and horse droppings. And this would be the work of the infamous Jack the Ripper.
Lisa saved my fiance. Dan is incredibly intelligent, super.
Yeah, so real quick, because I brought this up, I'm just going to explain it. And once again, I apologize for the commercials. I really need to get YouTube Premium, it seems. But so I mentioned the Freemasons. The Freemasons started as a network of stonemasons guild in medieval Europe. By the 1700s, it evolved into a society where members used the tools and symbols of masonry as a metaphor for moral and spiritual lessons. The official start of modern masonry was in 1717 when 4 lodges in London formed the first Grand Lodge. Freemasonry quickly spread across Europe and into America, drawing in thinkers, nobles, and some even founding fathers like George Washington, with 3 core values: apprentice, fellowcraft, and master mason. The group focuses on values like brotherhood, charity, and self-improvement. At Gettysburg, multiple generals were Masons. You'll see Freemasonry symbols all over American Civil War battlefields. People think the Freemasons control the world, and that's kind of what From Hell makes it look like the Freemasons are underground, controlling the British government and everything. It really isn't. It was a social club. It was an influential social club because it was mostly powerful people that were involved in it. People like George Washington were Freemasons. And Freemasonry will actually come under attack in 1940s. Adolf Hitler attacked the Freemasons. He saw them as a threat. He thought they were part of a greater conspiracy to take down Germany. So that's an interesting fact you could also take to the bank.
I'll stop with the British accent. I hope if you're still here, that's incredible. I know that whole intro was me. It started out really bad, I think. Really bad. And then I think it got a little bit better. My British, my lovely Londoners and other British people, let me know how terrible my accent was. You can hurt my feelings. It's fine. Also, I felt like I'm just gonna stay in this outfit because I think this hat is kind of fire. And this bow tie is as well. I can't actually read out of these glasses though, so I'm gonna X-nay those. Maybe I'll just use this, maybe. Anyway, let's get in to Jack the Ripper. So first, we're going to start with the first victim that we know of, which is Mary Ann Nichols, also known as Polly Nichols. And like I said, she was the first of the canonical 5 of Jack the Ripper. She was born in 1845 in London and married a printer's machinist named William Nichols in 1864. They would have 5 children, but then they would eventually separate due to marital issues in 1880. And after their separation, Mary Ann lived a very hard and unstable life, moving between workhouses, public lodgings, her father's house, and at the homes of various lovers, as you do. She also struggled with alcoholism, which made her resort to working in to earn money. So on the night of August 31st, 1888, Mary Ann Nichols would leave her lodging house without enough money for a bed or to pay for her stay. She said she would soon get the money by showing off her new bonnet. And if you don't know what a bonnet is, this is what a bonnet is. And she would last be seen alive by her roommate at around 2:30 a.m., walking along Whitechapel Road. Mary Ann Nichols probably did not see or hear her killer approaching, as he would attack her from behind and cut her throat very quickly. She may have felt some sudden pain before losing consciousness and dying. And about an hour later,
and once again, this is where the idea that it was a butcher came from. Only, I'm not, and it's probably going to sound stupid saying this, but it's kind of true. In this era, only a handful of professions are going to know what's going to silence someone quickly. That's what made these so terrifying. No one heard anything. He would literally slice their throats open in a way that would sever their windpipes. And I'm going to warn you guys, this is going to be graphic. This is about one of the most notorious serial killers in history. So it's going to be graphic. And, you know, I'm going to explain it how it was. What they did was he was able to cut the windpipes in such a way that they weren't able to make a sound, but also they would bleed out. And it was insane that he, in a city like London, to get away with this. Now, again, Polly, at first this could have just been anyone. This could have just been any random killing. Who knows? You know, people get murdered all the time in Whitechapel. But we're going to listen to Kris and see how it progresses.
Later, her body would be found on Bucks Row, which was a dark and deserted street, and she would be discovered by a gentleman named Charles Allen Lickman. Her throat would be, like we said before, but also her abdomen would be completely open. And the discovery of this murder obviously struck fear into the hearts and souls of the London's East Side, though not as unfortunate as Mary Ann Nichols. But the whole of London would be absolutely shaken by this murder, though this would hardly be the end of Jack the Ripper's reign of terror. Annie Chapman had been married to a man named John Chapman, and together they would have 3 children, Emily, Annie, and John, each of them naming a child after themselves. And their eldest, Emily, would unfortunately pass from meningitis when she was only 12 years old in 1882. And Annie and John would unfortunately separate about 2 to 3 years after Emily had passed away, in either 1884 or 1885. John would send Annie about 10 shillings a week, which she would live off of, which sounds crazy to me. But she would also live off her meager earnings from selling flowers as well and her crochet work. But on Christmas Day in 1886, however, John would unfortunately pass away, and Annie would turn to for work, with no more allowance coming from her husband anymore. So on the night of September 8th, 1888, Annie Chapman, similar to Mary Ann Nichols, would leave her lodging not able to pay for the night, and she would go to work on the streets. And Annie would last be seen alive by her friend at 1:35 a.m. walking along Rushfield Street. And about only an hour later, her body would be found in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, which was a lodging house. And Annie Chapman would be killed in the same way that Mary Ann Nichols was killed, with her throat and her abdomen completely open. But she would actually be in an even worse state than Mary Ann Nichols. Her insides had actually been pulled out of her cavity, and they would be placed over her shoulder, still all connected, by the way. It's saying it, reading about it, and then saying it out loud. It makes me cringe a lot. Oh God, just poor woman. This man was a monster. She would also be missing her uterus and her bladder, and she'd also be missing her lady parts as well.
And this is really where it starts getting egregious. You know, murdering people is already a horrific crime, but this is taking prizes now. This is, oh, I did this and I'm gonna keep doing it. You know, and again, he's doing this at night where no one can see. And he's doing it in the dark of the night. He's able to, you know, use his night vision that good. And the police are trying to investigate this. And this is something Kris does a lot, which, you know, sometimes they justify it. But for a police force like the London Metropolitan Police, this is nothing they've ever dealt with before. They've never dealt with something like this before. This is barbaric. Like, they've never seen this. And, you know, it's very hard, especially in the 1880s, to try to figure out what's going on here. I believe it is that Annie Chapman, though, they do get the first clue. It's a leather apron in a gutter. But there's also a strong belief that that wasn't actually his, or it was just there. But we don't know.
Like, there's a reason they called him Jack the Ripper. Like, I don't understand. And a young carpenter who had lived in the neighboring 27 Hanbury Street had reported hearing a woman scream, "No!" before hearing something fall against a fence connecting to the yards of 27 and 29 Hanbury Street. And you just didn't go and check it out? You just, is that normal? Maybe that was normal, I guess. I don't know. There's probably a bunch of stuff happening on the street.
In the 1880s, yeah, that's normal. As terrible as that is to say, that's very normal. You know, like, you had gangs in London, you know, like, honestly, look at something that I thought was very accurate in the film Gangs of New York was the depiction of the 5 points. That's how almost all metropolitan cities were in the late 1800s, the latter end of the Victorian era. It was not a nice place. It was not a forgiving place. And again, most of the people living in these districts were not natives. They were Hungarians, they were Jews, they were Irish, they were Scots, they were Poles, they were French, they were Germans, they were Russians. They were people that had just moved to England and were afraid to speak their voice up because they were new and they did not, and already people were opposed to immigration into England and they did not want to get screwed by speaking up. So yeah, you know what? If a British gang is doing something, you're gonna look your other way. Andrew Schultz, the comedian, makes this joke all the time, how New York City is the only city where they have to constantly tell you, if you see something, say something. That's based on all cities. Most cities, people mind their own business, and that's the scary thing. And that's why so much crime does happen in cities, because people are just like, I don't want to be involved, and they walk by. And sadly, until the worst happens, that's what happens.
I would probably check it out, call the cops. I guess did they even have phones? Oh my god, when were phones invented? I don't know. I'm upset. So Annie would be...
They did not. They would have gone off whistle calls and bells.
Jack the Ripper's second victim that we know of, which brings us to his third victim, Elizabeth Stride. Elizabeth Stride, also known as Long Liz, was the third victim of Jack the Ripper. She was born in Sweden, actually, and moved to England in 1866 at the age of 23. The year before, she had given birth to a stillborn daughter, following a pregnancy that resulted in her work in... and she would continue her work as a lady of the night in England, though she would occasionally clean houses and later marry a man named John Stride, with whom she would actually open a coffee shop with. But their marriage would eventually deteriorate, however, and they would separate, with John selling the coffee shop due to financial issues, which was all too prevalent at the time. If you can't see a pattern that's happening with separations and then money problems, it was just like an ongoing problem with most of the population, it seems, especially people that were more hard on financial times. So on September 29th, 1888, Elizabeth was paid 6 pence to clean 2 rooms at her lodge house on 32 Flower and Dean Street. And this was a notorious slum with little...
Just quickly on that. So 1880s is latter end of the Victorian era, but that's also the end of the U.S. Reconstruction. So the reason they were having a lot of financial issues, in England and all these countries, England is one of the countries that will get pulled in to the panic of 1893. That was kind of the depression before the depression. That was when people were afraid the stock markets were going to crash, all these businesses were going to fail. William McKinley actually is the one that takes the United States and, in a way, the world out of the panic of 1893, because what it is, he comes in 1897. That's why I said it, 1897. But what ends up happening is he institutes a tariff system, because the whole point of Reconstruction was to rebuild the United States. But the United States was getting loans from the United Kingdom, and we were starting to slowly default on those loans, and they were demanding the money back, and our economy was crashing. And as we know in economics, it's a chain reaction. If one economy starts crashing, another economy is going to start crashing. Somehow McKinley cleverly made the tariff system that he did in 1897, and that's what brought us into the Gilded Age. That's kind of the first American Golden Age after the Civil War. But that's why you'll see a lot of private businesses in England, and why a lot of women were pushed into prostitution, because a lot of their husbands were getting thrown out on the job because the British government was taxing highly to make up for the damages from their loans.
to no sanitation, with crime being a very, very frequent occurrence. Dubbed by some the worst street in London. But this would not be the worst street for Elizabeth Stride, as that would be reserved for Burner Street, where late that night or early in the morning on September 30th, 1888, Elizabeth would become the third victim of Jack the Ripper. So on Burner Street, Elizabeth's body would be discovered in the yard connected by the alley seen under the cartwheel in between the buildings. Her body would be discovered around 1 o'clock in the morning, similar to the other bodies. This guy's on a tight schedule, I don't know why, and would still be flowing from the knife wound in her neck, seemingly indicating that the Ripper might have been interrupted during this process, and that he had to flee to avoid discovery, and he couldn't finish his work, whatever. And this would be the closest he ever got to.
And they think that's why his next killing, which was, give me 1 second. So what I've started doing is I keep notes, just because everyone makes fun of me if I don't have notes, and by everyone I mean my brother-in-law. So that was Elizabeth Stride. Catherine Eddowes is the next victim. He killed her later that night. Catherine Eddowes, they think because of how frustrated he was by it screwing up with Elizabeth Stride, he mutilated Eddowes, and it was horrible. It was very clear he was upset that he almost got caught.
Actually being caught. And due to the lack of mutilation of Elizabeth's body, thank God, police were initially unsure if it was the doing of Jack the Ripper, until further events on the 30th would provide clarity. So perhaps due to the unfinished nature of the killing, September 30th would be a very busy night for the Ripper, as it would be the same night another body was found. Catherine Eddowes may have very well been able to live to see October, as around 8:30 a constable would find her lying down in the pavement near 29 Aldgate High Street. Louis Frederick Robinson, the constable, initially tried to assist Catherine to her feet, but after she would slump back over, it took Louis and another constable, George Simmons, to get her to Bishopsgate Station, where she was held until she sobered up, and Catherine would be released around 1 a.m. It's a bad time. It's a bad time to be on the streets at 1 a.m. in London. Oh my God. About at the same time that Elizabeth Stride was killed, and 44 minutes later, Catherine's body would be discovered. And on the southwest corner of Mitre Square by the police. Her throat, like the others, would also be, and similar to Annie, her insides would also be taken out and draped over her shoulder as well, with a piece about 2 feet long completely removed and placed between her body and her left arm with intention. Her face would also be very severely, and an earlobe as well. So personally, I do think that these additional injuries were a result of him not being able to finish the kill before on Elizabeth, and he was just so pent up that he took all of his frustration out on Catherine. It's such a...
Ever since Gamora was a little girl, she had her sights set on the sky.
Oh, that's embarrassing. So I was on this whole time. Yeah, what happened to Catherine Eddowes was horrific. And you know, had she just stayed the night in jail, she probably would have lived to see October. But yeah, it's very clear, and that's why people are kind of sure that Stride and Eddowes were connected, because of how mutilated Eddowes really was. They generally believe it's because he was so frustrated that he took it out on her.
A series of events, I just can't. And like that, we have photos of the bodies for some reason, I don't know, but like if they have them on the internet, I'm not going to show them, obviously.
Okay, well, there's a reason behind that. The reason behind that is this is the experimental age of photography and crime scene photography. These are some of the first big murder photographs that have ever been found. And I'm not going to show them either, because they are horrific what this guy did to these women. And, Mary Jane Kelly alone. If you want to look it up, look it up. I'm not going to show you, though. I'm sick imagining what he did to these women, because the thing is, the pictures, with the exception of Mary Jane Kelly, the pictures are post-autopsy, so they're all sewed up. So they look not as bad as they were when they found, but they still look terrible because of the horrific thing they were put through. Mary Jane Kelly, though, is of the crime scene. You can look it up if you want, but I'm just warning you all. It's graphic. It's bad.
But I can't even look at them. Like, they're horrible. Absolutely horrible. So the murder of Elizabeth and Catherine would be called the double event, after a letter was received, allegedly from Jack the Ripper, claimed the responsibility for the two murders, and it would be received by the London authorities, with blood on the letter as well, because he's a sick. And it would say this.
I was not codding, dear old boss, when I gave you the tip. You'll hear about Saucy Jackie's work tomorrow. Double event this time. Number one squealed a bit. Couldn't finish straight off. Had not time to get ears for police. Thanks for keeping last letter back till I got to work again. Jack the Ripper.
And this was supposedly what the letter said. It's not for sure, it's just supposedly. And this leads us to our next victim, which was Mary Jane Kelly. And Mary Jane Kelly was almost as mysterious as Jack the Ripper himself, as her name is a topic of some debate, seeing as she also went by several other names. Marie Jeanette Kelly, Fair Emma, Ginger, Dark Mary, and Black Mary. I want to go by a different name. That sounds fun. Give me a nickname down in the comments below. She also worked as a... And while the details of her life are largely unknown, what we do know is that her murder was by far the most gruesome out of all of them. So on the night of November 9th, 1888, she was in her room at 13 Miller's Court off Dorset Street, a slum that would frequently be occupied by criminals, and she would last be seen alive around 2 a.m. by her neighbor while singing a song. And about 7 hours later, her body would be found in her room by her landlord's assistant, which is much different than the other girls. They would all be found in the streets or street corners or alleyways.
So this is Aberlin. This is what Aberlin really looked like. It's not a handsome gentleman like Johnny Depp. He looked like a basic Victorian man. He actually kind of has my hairline, if I can be a little honest there, to add a little fun comedy to this horrific story going on.
But she was actually found in her room, and they would find her because they came to collect rent. And like I said, her body was by far the most brutal murder out of all of them.
And it's generally believed the reason it was that way. A lot of people make the assumption that it was because he knew her and he wanted vengeance. So there's some theories that he was a spawned lover and things like that, and the prostitutes were all friends and he was killing her friends, and then he saved the worst for her. To be honest, it's probably the simplest answer. He had privacy. He was able to get into the room, he locked the door, and he wasn't disturbed. And that's the difference between doing it in a private area than doing it on the streets like he did with the other ones. He had time with this ones. I think he put her heart in the tea kettle. I don't know if that's true, but I think he did. Just horrific.
There's crime scene photos. I'm not going to show them, obviously, but I have trouble keeping food down. Her throat, like the others, was, and her abdomen would also be opened, but they would be completely emptied of everything that was inside. Her heart would be missing, and her face and neck were beyond recognition. Her left arm would be partially removed, and her top area was also completely removed. And most of these removed parts would be found just scattered around the room, whereas the heart was never found. So as you probably noticed, over the course of the stories told of these women being murdered, Jack the Ripper had a very specific type. Each of them were, and many of them struggled with alcoholism. And who knows what exactly motivated Jack the Ripper? Did he hate women? Did he hate ladies of the night specifically? You could basically speculate.
Well, and honestly, again, Chris, I'm gonna just say this part for you. They're easy targets. Victorian England, look how prostitutes are looked at today. You think anyone was going to miss a prostitute in the 1880s? As terrible as that is to say, they were easy targets. And the thing was, who was going to go looking for them? Other prostitutes? And if not for how heinous the crimes were, this wouldn't have been a big deal in Whitechapel. They would have just thrown them into a pauper's grave. A pauper's grave. It would have meant nothing. but it was just the amount and how horrific it was that they're like, this guy is sick. This is a sick human being running around. And, you know, as terrible as that is to say, that's the reality, is they were easy targets, you know, frail. And I'm not going to say they were frail, honestly. They were probably very strong women. You know, you have to be to live that kind of lifestyle. But at the same time, you know, you're alone at night. And let's remove the doctor theory that it was a doctor or something, or a surgeon. Butcher's a strong guy. Like, he's going to win that fight. I would say 9 out of 10 times, if you're a butcher, you know, you're a big, strong dude, you're going to get the jump. And it's horrible and it's horrific. And that's what really makes this as scary as it is.
Speculate endlessly, since this happened 135 years ago. But there are some clues to point us in the direction of who this man might have been. So each woman was killed with their throat. And that, combined with the almost surgical of the bodies, has led some to theorize that Jack the Ripper was a surgeon or a doctor or someone in the medical field, or someone with medical training at least, given his familiarity with the human anatomy, which I think is very fair to assume. So let's go over the usual suspects.
God, oh my God, you just missed all of that. So I'm gonna stop the video there because you know, Kris, it's a long video. She goes into each suspect. There's like 10 they have, but I'm gonna go over 4 we have. We have Montague John Druitt, a barrister and teacher. He committed suicide a few days later. He was a suspect, and it was very coincidental that he decided to kill himself a few days later, but there was never any substantial evidence. Aaron Kaminsky is one of the people very strongly believed to have done it. He was a Polish barber. He had very bad mental health issues, and he was a very strong suspect just because of his irrational behavior. Dr. Thomas Neal Cream, a convicted serial killer who allegedly confessed to being Jack the Ripper before his execution, though his presence in Whitechapel during the murder is disputed. And then last but not least, Prince Albert Victor, the grandson of Queen Victoria. This theory has been completely debunked. Again, this is this plays into the propaganda against Freemasonry, the belief that the Masons did it because they were doing some rituals or something. There's no evidence that ever happened. I will say there was something interesting I learned when I was in London doing the Jack the Ripper studying and everything. Nothing can be made public until the Crown signs off on it. So when the Jack the Ripper case was given to the Queen to sign off on it, she put 100-year bind on it. Queen Victoria put 100-year bind on it. So 1889, when would that bind end? 1989. So in 1989 it opens. Queen Elizabeth II, may she rest in peace, she opens it. She puts a 200-year bind on it. So that's why I'm very interested in what actually is in that file, because what was in it that made her put 200 years on it? Because clearly 100 years, Victoria thought people would forget about it. But the thing is about something like Jack the Ripper is it's just so insane that we look at it and we're like, what happened? and you didn't catch him, you didn't catch this person. But Jack the Ripper, he's inspired so much media. You know, there's a Sherlock Holmes where he takes on Jack the Ripper. You know, it's all these different things. League of the Extraordinary Gentlemen, it's a comic book series and a book. They kind of in a weird way make it that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are Jack the Ripper. And also, really, if you look at the design of Mr. Hyde, it corresponds a lot with Jack the Ripper's design. The top hat, the overcoat, the cane. With that said, we need to remember this because this is something that, you know, we want to make sure we're vigilant of. You know, like Chris says, if you hear something at night, don't just ignore it. Act on it. You know, where I live, you know, me and Nick just heard something outside right before I made this video, and we were like, hello? You know, sometimes, you know, as much as people talk about horror movies about not doing stupid stuff, sometimes if you don't check on something, it continues. And, you know, sadly, Jack the Ripper got away with a lot of these kills because no one was willing to step in and be like, what's going on here? But with that said, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed that. Definitely give KallmeKris a check. She releases great crime videos and stuff. Same thing with Selena. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and comment. Share with family and friends. Hit that red subscribe button. Hit the bell icon to stay up to date with all of our videos. My name is Tim. Please think about joining our Patreon. We have this private, sergeant, captain, colonel, and marshal patron levels, and we also have our National Park Preservation Fund, which I would greatly appreciate if we could donate to help our national parks in these tough and turbulent times. Thank you so much, y'all, for watching, and we will see you in the next one.